My wife and I have been together for 8 years. I have been married for the past 5 years. We met at college. We've both been working hard to advance our jobs and salaries in the few months since our marriage. My wife began gaining weight. She had been overweight before attending college. She had informed me that when she was overweight, she felt inferior to other women and never wanted to go back. 3 years into our marriage, she was 70 pounds overweight. This impacted her self-esteem and our intimate relationship. I managed my weight by going to the gym on a regular basis. I often pushed my wife to join me, but she always declined. She didn't enjoy the hardcore weightlifters gym I went to. When she reached 75 pounds or more, she decided to start attending the gym. She joined another, more mainstream gym that caters to women. The gym has a lot more treadmills and bikes. They also offered early morning aerobics courses, which my wife attended before going to work. After a year, my wife had lost her entire weight and more. My wife's self-esteem was restored, and our intimate relationship improved. After 6 more months, my wife looked better than ever. She was now obtaining a fake tan, letting her hair grow out, and dressing more appropriately. She looked great. I was looking forward to our private moments more than ever. Unfortunately, our intimate relationship deteriorated after a few months. Almost nothing. She informed me she was exhausted from her workouts and encouraged me to take care of myself. When she first told me this, I felt like she had spit on me. Now, I'm caught between a rock and a hard place, with the rock being a trusted relationship and the hard place being, is she cheating? Not the type of person to sit around and hope for the best. Forget the rock. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it and have to kiss her ass for a few months, whereas doing nothing invites self-doubt into my life. Life is difficult enough already. I placed a voice-activated recorder in the lining of her purse and enabled location tracking on her phone. I discovered that she was meeting someone special on Tuesday and Friday mornings. On those days, she spent intimate time with a trainer in his apartment's gym. His name was Jim. He was one of those health fanatics who committed every moment of his life to looking his best and staying as fit as possible. His social media feed was loaded with photos of himself posing, working out, or competing in some sort of race. I'm not sure how I managed the next 3 weeks. I was in a mental fog of sorrow, alternately angry and melancholy. I started working out longer in the morning and added a program after work. I felt inadequate and thought that enhancing my appearance would win back my wife. I cleaned up and gained muscle, but my wife was in her own world. She didn't see how ripped I'd gotten. She didn't realize how depressed I was at my lowest point. Screw her financially. Divorce would be easy. We rented an apartment. We had money in our joint bank account. Our cars cost around the same, and we are roughly the same age. Our true savings were in her 401k account. My workplace did not provide a 401k. Now for the vengeance. I know. Choose the moral high road. And don't waste your time or energy on things that don't benefit you. Do not glance backwards. Move on with your life. Nope. I intended to gain personal satisfaction while also burning down the situation. I believe this to be my personal treatment for never looking back. After I finished, my plan was straightforward. Their fitness drew them together. I'd take it away from them. Don't allow her to profit from her deception. Loverboy had an apartment on the first level that overlooked a pool area. I purchased a camera that you placed into a light fixture, then screwed the light bulb into it. I pointed the camera at Loverboy's front door. What a surprise. Loverboy was meeting with 3 other women at the gym. They're all married. They didn't even bother to remove their wedding bands. I also discovered that Loverboy did not lock his door when he went to the pool, and a neighbor would stop by every now and again to invite him back to her apartment. They were together for around an hour. So, during one of his visits to her apartment, I went to his apartment and installed cameras in each room. Fortunately for me, he kept USB phone power adapters in each room. I replaced them with USB power adapters with motion-activated concealed cameras. I also linked them to my home computer so that they could continuously broadcast. I also photographed everything in his apartment. So I watched a few weeks' worth of videos. I have to confess that he was meeting with some stunning women at the gym. My wife is a really lovely woman, but 2 of the other women were more attractive, although slightly older. The third woman was my wife's age but about 20 pounds heavier. Their interactions had a predictable pattern of intimacy and connection. He had a confident demeanor, but he was far from outstanding. All 3 women paid for his services. The gorgeous woman appeared to have paid $100 each, whereas the overweight woman paid $200. My wife didn't pay for anything. She was trading something with him. I later discovered chemicals, which the container listed as human growth hormones. Loverboy was taking human growth hormones and other performance-enhancing medications. On weekends, the neighbor would stop by his flat. They'd spend time together. So I informed my wife that I had a work trip to Los Angeles. Then I rented a car and drove down to Tijuana. I hired a professional for the day. My objective was to have her receive many prescriptions from doctors for birth control pills. When I explained what I wanted, she said she had a better approach. She knew a pharmacist who would give her whatever she wanted. She added that all of the girls had utilized him for various drugs. I inquired if he could offer it in liquid form for a syringe. She responded yes, but it was probably meant for animals. She called him to set it up. I drove her to the pharmacist. She introduced us. I explained what I needed, paid him, and we departed. I handed her 4 times the amount she said she made in a day. And, yeah, I received a service from her. Remember, I had not been intimate with anyone in about a year. Lover injected himself with a hidden stockpile of narcotics every few days, using his spare house key, which I discovered after my first visit. I took all of the testosterone from his vials and replaced it with estrogen. I went home and changed all of my wife's human growth hormones with testosterone. Almost 2 months later, my wife began to show the symptoms. Her muscles became visibly larger, and she began to lose her anger. Her skin also started to break out more frequently. I suggested she use a different tanning spray. Loverboy began to appear noticeably softer. During my wife's weekly visit, I noticed him looking distressed after weighing himself on his bathroom scale. She seemed like a different person. He began using extra substances to maintain his performance. My wife first expressed concern that the human growth hormone he was providing her was different, or in a higher dose than before. He assured her that this was not the case. 4 months into Loverboy's treatment, he noticed a change and increased his injections. He lost all of his contacts, including my wife. He could not maintain his old lifestyle and appeared to have lost interest. My wife couldn't stop herself from having violent outbursts followed by severe mood swings. She'd then be upset with herself for losing control, followed by tears. Loverboy lost his job at the gym after he burst into tears in front of everyone. A friend told me that someone had teased him about his appearance. He tried to cry on my wife's shoulder, but she wouldn't allow it. When he tried to beg her again, she lost her rage and hit him in the stomach. He genuinely lay on the floor, gripping his stomach and crying. My wife loomed over him, insulting and calling him names. She was also thrown out of the gym. Neither Loverboy nor my wife visited the doctor to get tested. I assumed they had been using too many illegal narcotics to care what a doctor had to say. Loverboy began to experience bodily changes, including the loss of hair. He finally saw a doctor. Blood tests revealed that he suffered from hormone abnormalities. They suspected his thyroid and surgically removed it. He will receive treatment for the rest of his life. My wife joined another gym but didn't put in as much effort. She seems to have lost her motivation. Her link. She regained all of her weight, began losing hair, and had a skin disease affecting her entire back, chest, rear, thighs and face. Now she begged me for intimacy. I informed her that I would not be intimate with her until I was confident that her disease was not contagious. I hadn't slept on the same bed with her in months. My wife finally visited a doctor. By this point, the substances had worn off. My wife was scheduled for an allergy appointment, and the doctor gave her some drugs to assist her sadness. My wife had reached rock bottom emotionally. The next morning, there was an envelope on the front seat of my wife's car. Inside, there was a voice player, 2 photos and a letter. The first photo showed my wife in a compromising posture with Jim. The second depicted my wife holding a substance. The medicine label was readily visible on the container on the table next to her. The letter stated that I knew you were having an intimate connection with Jim. I have video and audio recordings. I will leave you instructions to leave me $10,000 in the 20s, or I will go to your husband and the authorities with the evidence of illegal substances. I'll contact you later about how to obtain the money. My wife was listening to the cassette in our driveway when I glanced out at her. She overheard her and Jim's chat. There was also a conversation in which my wife told Jim that I was a loser. I could tell she was shocked when she heard the tape. The disbelief was soon replaced by fury. My wife started her car and took off. I tracked her using the GPS. She was heading straight to Jim's flat. While watching the pool camera, I noticed her banging on Jim's door. When he opened the door, she sprang on him and began pounding him before he could move her away and calm down. She had severely wounded his face and pulled a large chunk of his hair out. He didn't have much hair left to lose after the recorders in his flat. Jim, what the hell is wrong with you? Wife? You are attempting to blackmail me, you worthless piece. Jim, I'm trying. What wife? Blackmail me? Or you'll tell my husband and the cops about my drug use. Jim, why the heck would I do that? I've got more to lose than you. If it comes out, wife jerk, you do not have a wife to lose. Jim, the stuff is. I could go to jail for the narcotics. My wife paused talking and held out the letter. Jim read the letter and responded, "I'm sorry this is happening to you, but it isn't me. In fact, I was just finishing up packing my belongings. I'm moving back home with my parents until I can get a job and become well again." He handed her the letter. My wife finally discovered that most of Jim's belongings were gone, or in cartons. She then realized Jim had 2 black eyes and a cast covering his right knee. My wife. "What the hell happened to Jim? Your husband isn't the only one who's furious with me." My wife stared at Jim. "What do you mean, Jim? There are 3 other spouses that constantly confront me." My wife shrieked. "You were with 3 other women, whilst you were with me." Jim apologized and began to cry. The wrong answer. My wife grabbed his t-shirt and hit him hard, shattering his nose. Jim collapsed onto his back, leaving my wife looking down at him, while holding his shredded t-shirt in her hand. "Wife, I told you that you were worthless. If I find out you had anything to do with this, I will harm you." My wife stormed out the door, and Jim sat on the floor crying. That night after work, I could tell my wife was upset. I didn't say anything. I left another note in her car, instructing her to store the money in a gym bag and leave it in the trunk of her car while she was at the gym that day. When she returned from the gym, the bag had vanished, and in its place was a cell phone with a voice-disguising device. The next day, I called my wife and explained that the $10,000 was only a test. I'd leave her alone if she cashed out her 401k and gave it to me. She lost her rage and told me she would never do that again. I thanked her for the $10,000 and hoped she enjoyed her divorce, jail sentence, and relatives. She was an unfaithful woman. After attempting to negotiate with me, I sent her one of the videos, and she eventually gave in. It took her a month to withdraw the money. I told her to leave the money in her husband's trunk, and I'd get it while he was at the gym that evening. I told her that she would not hear from me again, especially since she was out of money. Her GPS indicated that she was following me. I noticed she was parked down the street, keeping an eye on my car. I purchased a case of protein powder, handed the trainer my car keys, and instructed him to place it in the trunk of my car while he did so. I went to work out. When I returned from the gym that evening, I watched her sneak out and check in my trunk. The protein box was there, but the money was gone. A few days later, I brought her to a really fancy restaurant to celebrate our anniversary. Men are expected to wear a jacket and tie, while ladies must wear dresses. During drinks, I handed her the divorce papers and photos from her affair. Her first query was, "How did you get these?" I told her I found them on my front seat. After going to the gym, she began crying and told me she loved me and that we could work through this. I informed her that the evidence proved she had been meeting with him for about a year. I'd also heard some of the terrible things she'd said about me. I had even heard she planned to take all of our money and leave with him. She cried and promised to be the best wife a husband could ask for. "What?" I told her quietly. "That's what got us in this predicament. You've shed weight and improved your attitude. And what have you done with it? You have betrayed me. Now you're back to being depressed. And I am meant to take you back." I paused for a few moments and stared at her. "You are just a letdown." She sat motionless as my words bounced around in her thoughts. She recognized them but couldn't recall where she'd heard them previously. Then there was the recognition in her eyes. She blew up huge, as one could imagine. She cried loudly, "You, son of a balloon, I'm going to murder you." She flung her drink at me. I pushed away from the table and wiped my face. I accidentally pushed the table into her stomach. She viewed that as an insult. She snatched up her salad and flung it at me. She then took a steak knife and lunged over the table, attempting to injure me. The tip of the knife slashed through my jacket. I was quickly backpedaling, and she was following me. Fortunately, she used the conventional overhand stab, and I was able to grab her arm. 2 waiters then assisted me in wrestling her to the ground, as she yelled that she was going to murder me. We were able to get the knife away and her onto her stomach on the floor. The 2 waiters sat on her back until the cops arrived. When the cops arrived, she was still furious. When the waiters got off her back, she surprised everyone by springing up and attempting to stab me again with the knife she had been lying on. The police tasered her, handcuffed her, and took her away. When the police questioned me, I briefly mentioned that I had issued her divorce papers for adultery. I informed them that I began recording everything after she began ranting at me. I didn't tell them. I started it shortly after I expressed my disappointment. After watching the movie, they requested that I provide them a copy. Then they left video footage of the restaurant brawl, and her attempt to hurt me resulted in jail time. That, together with her evidence of adultery, helped me get a favorable divorce settlement. In fact, I received everything of the cash and assets save her automobile. My wife had misappropriated a significant chunk of our marital assets, including her 401k. The judge told my wife that he felt the missing money, $10,000 and 400 wunk, was in her or her lover's possession. In either case, she was accountable for repaying my owing part. She strongly denied having the money, and her blackmail story fell flat. She even tried to blame me for orchestrating it, but she just had accusations. She had to give me alimony for 5 years to make up for the loss from her theft. As for me, I had a fantastic weekend in Las Vegas, and won about as much as my wife had stolen from me. After paying taxes on $10,000 plus the 401k amount, I was able to reinvest the funds in my own retirement account. With my ever-improving salary and 5 years of alimony, I was able to purchase my own condo and a pair of really excellent cars. And I still wonder why individuals are so stupid as to breach the confidence of the one they love and trust the most, only to expect that person not to betray them in return. Here's the next story. The morning had begun like any other. Simple and predictable, cloaked in the appearance of routine. The sun was just starting to poke its golden fingers through the slats, forming faint stripes on the wooden floor. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee permeated the home, mixed with a subtle hint of my wife's pricey vanilla-scented candles. I stepped quietly down the hallway, mug in hand, going for the study. I had planned a weekend effort to organize the money. She double-checked her daughter Emma's college fund. I grinned slightly at the concept. I'd planned to surprise Emma with something extra, just a tiny bonus to help her get through her final semester without worrying about money. The home was abnormally silent. There was no TV blasting in the background, no footsteps, just a gentle, secretive murmur of voices emanating from the slightly open bedroom door. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was not even curious. It was only there, a whisper, a statement that slipped through the opening like a bullet fired directly at my heart. You know, he truly feels the baby is his. I froze, tightening my fingers around the mug's handle until the ceramic creaked. A hollow feeling formed in my chest, spreading like frost on glass. I leaned in closer, the words keeping me in place, while my heart thudded against my ribs like a war drum. Emma's voice joined in, her laughter shrill and grating like broken glass scraping against tile. How clueless can one man be? Clueless. The word resonated, bouncing off the walls and inside of my head. I blinked, hoping it would relieve the sting. Reset the moment. Make it unreal. I moved closer. Stepped silently on the flooring. Breathe in shallowly. I heard my wife's voice again. Smooth, honey-coated. But suddenly it felt like venom was slipping beneath my skin. That loser is our makeshift ATM. Each word landed like a smack, leaving behind imperceptible welts. And the best part? That collegiate discovery he is so proud of. Emma's voice radiated scorn and venom. I had no idea she was capable of this. My wife giggled, a sound that used to bring me comfort on the coldest days. It seemed like acid was burning away the last of my trust. Oh, I can't wait until this is over. The wedding will be perfect. Me and my love. Living the life we have always desired. Mr. Perfect husband gets left in the dust. We've signed the divorce papers, divided our assets, and are now free. He has no idea. Silence. Complete. Deafening quiet. I stared at the floor, my eyesight blurred. I have a ringing in my ears, like the aftermath of an explosion. My hand loosened involuntarily, and the coffee mug slid from my grasp, breaking against the hardwood with a bang that seemed too loud to be final. The conversations inside the room grew dead silent. Shit. I awoke from my stupor and automatically crouched, picking up the sharp pieces with shaky fingers. My heart was racing, but not my face. I forced it to be peaceful, neutral, unreadable. That was something I had learned through years of attending corporate meetings. I was good with masks. The door creaked open a little more, revealing Emma's face. Her expression softened to something artificial. Concern was painted over smugness. "Oh, are you all right?" she inquired, her tone oozing with the phony sweetness she'd mastered. I looked up, faking a grin, but the tightness tugged at the corners of my mouth unnaturally. "Yeah," I said softly, holding out a shard of shattered mug. "Maybe I'm a touch clumsy today." Her gaze remained on me just a little too long, as if looking for something beneath the surface. Then she shrugged and disappeared back inside the room. Her laughter resumed almost quickly. I stood up carefully, dumping the fragments in the trash. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. The blood on my palm came from clutching the ceramic too tightly. Not due to any accidental cuts. That's when I recognized something within me had shattered. Unlike the cup, which crashed suddenly, this one crashed quietly, cleanly, like the last thread of a fraying rope giving way. I didn't experience the heartbreak I was expecting. I didn't feel anything. There's no wrath yet. Not to worry, just a chilly, hollow void where love once lived. I gazed around the house. My house is packed with images from family vacations, framed certificates, and anniversary gifts. They felt like stage props. part of a set created to offer the appearance of a non-existent life. I went to the restroom, sprayed cold water on my face, and looked at my reflection. Mr. Perfect Husband, I reflected sadly. The fool and the puppet. But not anymore. That was the day I died. A new guy was born. Not a man who would beg. Not a man who would break. A man who will destroy. The morning following that talk seemed different. The wall appeared smaller, the air heavier, as if the house itself had overheard the betrayal and had become part of the deception. But I was not the same man anymore. Something within me had moved. Broken, perhaps. But what emerged from the fractured fragments was not weakness. It was clarity. I awoke to the faint fragrance of coffee, something I used to enjoy. But suddenly it smelled like deception. She was in the kitchen, singing softly with her back to me, wearing my favorite robe, which I had purchased for her last Christmas. It used to represent comfort, warmth, and affection. Now it was just fabric wrapped around a stranger. "Morning, babe," she murmured pleasantly as I entered. She pours herself a cup. She did not even bother pouring one for me. "Morning," I said, forcing a strange smile on my face. I kissed her on the cheek, and the sensation was similar to pressing my lips on a smooth mask. The underside is hollow. She grinned, not noting the tightness of my touch. That's when I realized she'd never actually seen me. I was merely a piece of the scenery in her meticulously planned existence. I executed my role flawlessly. The adoring husband, the doting fool. But beneath that performance, a tempest was developing, ferocious and calculated. That afternoon, she was presumably out with him. I sat at my desk, where I had previously planned family trips, paid bills, and handled Emma's college fund. This has now become my battle room. I contact my lawyer, Gregory Gregg. I need to rearrange my accounts immediately. Complete secrecy is maintained offshore. There was a pause at the other end. "Is everything okay?" he asked carefully. "Never better," I said, my voice silky and devoid of any hint of the heat that burned beneath. "Simply tightening things up. You are aware of family security." "Understood," he responded. "I will send you the paperwork. Click the next button." The college fund. Emma had boasted about insulting me behind closed doors. I logged into my account and looked at the balance for a bit. 6 figures. I'd labored feverishly to save the future I imagined I was creating for her temporary ATM. Her sentences were repeated with a few keystrokes. It was gone. Transferred to a secure holding that I solely controlled. The inheritance plans were revoked. Legal documents are drafted and signed. Leave nothing to chance. It felt satisfying. Not in a petty manner, but like recovering control of my life and my worth. That evening she returned home. Her perfume lingered in the doorway before she ever entered. I used to associate this perfume with date evenings and gentle whispers. Now it smelled like treachery. Bottled and sold. "Hello, honey," she called out in her own voice. "Light rehearsal. You won't believe how crazy the traffic was." Liar. I looked up from the couch and grinned lazily. "Oh, yes. I hope it was not too horrible." She put her luggage on the counter and went in for a kiss. I complied. I'm tasting a slight hint of guilt. Or perhaps it was just my imagination. "Did you pay your electricity bill?" "I believe they sent a reminder," she questioned as she poured herself a glass of wine. "Of course, dear," I responded. My smile never wavered. I sipped my drink, anticipating that the lights would go out soon. Literally and metaphorically. She rambles on about her day, unaware that the man sitting opposite from her is no longer the naive fool she once believed he was. Over the next 4 days, I mastered deception. Each encounter represented a move on my chessboard. "Babe, have you confirmed Emma's tuition payment?" "I've already handled it." Even if the university center emails her about the unanticipated issues with her account, she would probably shrug, distracted. She was overconfident in her deception. I began to notice the minute details that I had previously neglected. She spent more time texting, had unexpected work meetings, and protected her phone as if it contained state secrets. The more I observed, the easier it was to separate and plan. One evening, we held a dinner party. Friends. Laughter. Wine flowed as if nothing was wrong. She was radiant, laughing at jokes, holding onto my arm when it suited her, and portraying the loving wife. But I could see it. She exchanged looks with him, and made tiny touches, when they thought no one was watching. But I was. "You're silent tonight," she said, her palm resting on my thigh beneath the table. I smiled and leaned in. I mumbled, taking everything in. She had no idea I meant all of her lies and dishonesty. The closing moments of her meticulously built kingdom. The storm was approaching, and I was its architect. Revenge is not a fit of wrath. It is a symphony composed note by note. Each chord is played with accuracy. I was not looking for small satisfaction. I wanted to own them, to make their failure as intentional as their treachery. And the first note of my masterpiece, information. I engaged Marcus, a private investigator who was recommended to me through covert channels. He was the type of man who only asked for remuneration, not moral questions. We met at a dirty cafe off the highway. The neon lights flickered like fading stars. Marcus handed a plain envelope across the table, his fingers covered with cigarette smoke. "Are you sure you want to view this?" he inquired, his voice gravelly. The words carried the sense that whatever was within would change me. "I would not have paid you otherwise." I opened the envelope. Fingers, a steady heartbeat. Not very much. Photographs poured out. My wife and he intertwined in hotel rooms, kissing in parked automobiles like teens holding hands at restaurants. I had taken her too. The irony wounded more than the sights. One photo showed her wearing the necklace I gave her on our anniversary. She smiled the same smile she had given me numerous times. But it wasn't intended for me anymore. I felt my fury rise, hot and biting, but I buried it deep. Anger is impulsive. Revenge is patient. His name was Daniel Cross. How apt, given how he entered my life like a parasite. He was nothing extraordinary. The face is average. A typical job operating a failing marketing agency. He pretended to be the next big thing. He was arrogant enough to believe he was bright, but not astute enough to understand the trap I was about to set. I completed my homework. He learned about his debts and failed contracts. He sorely wanted investors, but was unable to acquire them. That is where I would come in. Not as the grieving husband, but as Jonathan Steele, a venture entrepreneur with deep means and deeper intentions. We met at an upscale downtown bar that he frequented, most likely in an attempt to feel important in a world that ignored him. I donned a fitted suit, my costly watch gleaming in the dim lighting. Confidence clothed in silk and steel. Daniel Cross. I approached with a silky voice, like aged whiskey. He looked up, shocked and intrigued. "Yeah. Do I know you?" I smiled and extended a hand. "Jonathan Steele, I've heard a lot about your firm. I thought we could have a talk." His ego grew instantaneously. "Oh, well, you've come to the correct guy," he replied, waving me to a seat as if he were doing me a favor. For the next 3 weeks, we met regularly. Business meals, drinks, and informal discussions about development potential. I played the role flawlessly, fueling his arrogance while dangling the prospect of investment just out of reach. "Your pitch deck has potential," I said one evening while swirling bourbon in my glass. "But there's something lacking. A strategic partner, someone who can help it grow." He leaned closer, his eyes sparkling with desperation camouflaged by ambition. "And you'd be the partner." I chuckled. "Possibly if I see the correct value." He sold himself faster than I expected. Within a month, we had signed agreements on paper. He owed me his entire company's assets and his financial future. Gregory, my lawyer, evaluated the contracts under the pretense of investor protection. In truth, these were chains around his neck. We celebrated the transaction. An upscale rooftop bar with city lights shimmering like distant stars. "You have a sharp mind," Daniel added, clinking his glass against mine. I grinned and raised my drink. "And you have no idea." I imagined the words as venom on my tongue. I watched him grin, unconcerned, as my wife texted him under our shared roof, believing she was part of some huge escape plan. But the truth was simple. She was not escaping anything. She was walking straight into the trap I had set up, step by planned step. The thing about lies is that they are frail, delicate threads woven into a complex web. However, all it takes is one pull for the whole thing to unravel. I'd been patient, arranging each aspect with precision, like a puppeteer pulling unseen strings. It was now time to watch the performance crumble. It began quietly. A darkness falls over their picture-perfect existence. A crisp Monday morning. The kind where the sky is overly bright and life is too ordinary. I sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee. The stench of burnt toast lingered because she had left it in the toaster again. My wife Vanessa walked into the room, scrolling through her phone. Her face was wrinkled with confusion. Then something happened. "What the hell?" she mumbled, her voice sharp enough to pierce the air. I looked up, pretending modest interest. "Is there something wrong?" She did not respond immediately. Her fingers furiously tapped her phone screen, and her face turned pale. She stood abruptly, her chair skidding hard across the tiled floor. "Our accounts. They are empty," she screamed. The words reverberated off the clean walls like a funeral knell. I blinked, skillfully concealing the satisfaction bubbling beneath the surface. "Empty. Are you certain?" "Perhaps there's an error," I responded, furrowing my brow to emphasize my anxiety. She gave me a scowl, her skepticism mixed with growing panic. No, this cannot be correct. Where is the money?" She slammed her laptop onto the kitchen counter. Fingers fly across the keyboard. I observed her face. As she glanced at the facts, her uncertainty turned to dread. Zero balances red alerts, which flashed like alarms. Jonathan, have you done anything? Transfer money. Close accounts. Her voice quivered. Her poise deteriorated with each word. I sipped my coffee gently and shrugged. Not that I remember. Perhaps you should call the bank. She did it right there, pacing around the kitchen. Her voice grew louder with each second of the call. However, the answers were all the same. Yes, ma'am. The accounts were closed by the primary account holder. Me? The days that followed were a masterpiece of slow-motion disaster. The credit card payments bounced first, followed by the utility bills. The house, previously pristine and frigid like a showroom, became messier with each passing day. Unopened invoices piled on the counter. Collection notices stuffed into drawers she assumed I wouldn't notice. Vanessa's irritability bubbled out at dinner one evening. The stain was thick enough to cut with a dull knife. Jonathan. Something is amiss with the college money, she exclaimed, tossing a letter on the table like an accusation. The official seal of the scholarship office glared at me. I picked it up and pretended to peruse it while knowing exactly what it stated. It looks like it's been canceled. Across the room, Emma. My stepdaughter. Their small accomplice in deception. Froze in mid-bite as she clattered into the plate. What? She shrieked, and snatched the letter from my hands. She read it aloud, her voice becoming louder with each word until it burst into a full-blown scream. He is unable to do this. Oh, I already did. It must have been a clerical error. I remarked this while taking another mouthful of my steak. You understand how cumbersome these institutions can be. Vanessa slapped her glass down, spilling wine over the rim. Cut the bullshit, Jonathan. What's happening? I met her stare calmly and unflinchingly. I don't know what you're talking about, sweetheart. The room was filled with unspoken insults and accusations, but neither of them dared to express the single thought that was gnawing at their throats. Did he know? Panic spreads like a sluggish poison. I watched Vanessa's sleek exterior collapse. She spent hours on the phone, her voice alternating between sweet desperation and vicious threats. Emma rushed about the house, banging doors, her entitled wrath louder than words. Debt collectors began calling. The house phone rang nonstop, each loud tone representing a small win. When I arrived home one evening, Vanessa was seated on the floor, surrounded by overdue invoices. Her hair was untidy and her makeup smudged. She was not the composed woman she claimed to be. Jonathan, she whispered when she spotted me, her voice frail, like a thread unraveling. Please let me know if you did anything wrong, so that we can solve it. I knelt beside her and brushed a stray hair from her cheek. My touch is delicate, almost sensitive. Of course, sweetheart, I muttered. We will work it out. But I already had. She just didn't realize it yet. The morning sunshine poured through the half-open shutters, leaving long golden streaks over the kitchen floor. The sole sound in the house was the gentle hum of the refrigerator, punctuated by the soft clink of my spoon stirring coffee. But, beneath the tranquil exterior, the storm had finally made landfall. I heard her before I saw her footfalls, which were quick and irregular, booming down the wooden corridor like warning bullets. The door slammed open with a force that rocked the hinges. There she stood. Vanessa. Her hair is a twisted mess. The eyes were filled with desperation. The face flushed with fury and panic. She slapped her palm against the kitchen table, sending a mound of unpaid bills fluttering like injured birds. What the hell is going on, Jonathan? Where is the money? She spit. Her voice trembles. Not with grief, but with terror. The type of terror that comes from being meticulously built. The house of lies begins to disintegrate around you. I did not flinch. I simply sipped my coffee, enjoying the bitter warmth as if it were the best drink in the world. Calm, collected. In charge. Funny, I said, gently laying the mug down, the porcelain softly clicking on the wood. Like a gavel. I was about to ask you the same thing. Perhaps you should check with your lover. Her face drained of color so quickly. It was like seeing a flame be extinguished by an invisible gust. She stumbled back one step. Her mouth opened and closed, like a fish panting for oxygen. What? She stammered, her voice suddenly little and weak. I stood slowly, savoring each moment of the silence that stretched between us. Then I moved forward slightly, my voice lowering to a low, lethal whisper. I could hear everything. Her knees buckled, as if the words had been real blows. She sank into a chair, shivering as she grasped the table's edge. The tears flowed quickly, hot and untidy, streaking down her cheeks like ink on wet paper. I apologize. This was a mistake. She sobbed as her body shook. Please, Jonathan, I did not mean it. I laughed quietly, cold and hollow. The kind of laugh that conveys no joy. Only a harsh edge of truth. Okay, It was a mistake. Yours. Not mine. She reached for me, desperately clutching for something. Perhaps redemption or control. But I took a step back and saw her crumble. Jonathan, I was perplexed. It did not signify anything. I love you. She cried, her voice breaking like glass under strain. No, I replied forcefully. My voice sliced through her. Please. You enjoy what I provided you. The warmth, stability, and temporary home. Right? Her cries intensified, filling the kitchen like a siren. Emma stormed in, phone clutched in one hand, face contorted with rage. What have you done to us? She screamed, tears welled in her eyes. Not from heartbreak, but from entitlement. I gently turned toward her, my smile razor sharp. Me? I gave you exactly what you deserved. I took back everything you had never appreciated. Vanessa dropped to her knees and grabbed my hand, her tears soaking the car and my clothes. Please, Jonathan. We can remedy this. We can start over. She begged, her words filled with desperation. Not love. I felt nothing as I stared down at her. The lady I had once imagined was my spouse. Only a cold, satisfying emptiness. There is nothing left for us to fix, I whispered, releasing my hand. You ruined it the moment you realized I wasn't enough. She sank totally and sobbed on the floor as Emma cursed me. Her remarks were cutting but powerless. I picked up my coffee, took a final sip, and walked away, leaving their ruined world behind. Just as they intended to do to me. But there is a distinction. I truly succeeded. Revenge does not come with fireworks or dramatic tunes. It is quieter and more insidious. It seeps into their life, eroding everything piece by fragile piece until all that remains are echoes of their own mistakes. And Daniel Cross, the man who believed he had won the lotto, when he seduced my wife, was the first domino to fall. It began with small changes in his business. The contracts I'd invested in were riddled with legal pitfalls concealed beneath attractive papers. His failing marketing firm, which was already on life support, was easily propelled over the edge. I withdrew funds, froze accounts, and triggered provisions that left him drowning in debt. I observed from a distance as the walls closed in on him. One afternoon, I sat comfortably at a cafe overlooking the downtown cityscape, sipping an espresso and reading the news from my iPad. There it was. Cross Media declares bankruptcy amid a financial scandal. Poetic. The story explained how Daniel's company failed on financing. Investors backed away, and suppliers sued for unpaid payments. His reputation suffered after the shoddy armor he proudly donned was shredded in public. I could almost hear the panic in his voice, the late-night calls to lawyers, the desperate attempts to save what had already been lost. A few days later, I met him in person. Not planned. Just a little encore. I was leaving a nice office building when he stumbled past me on the sidewalk, tattered suit and wrinkled tie. What about you? He was shouting into his phone, his voice booming with rage. I said I would receive the money. Please give me more time. When he saw me, he barked and stopped in his tracks. Our gazes met. His look changed from perplexity to recognition to something delicious. Fear. I offered him a polite nod. The kind strangers exchanged pleasantries before walking away. However, as I passed, I leaned in slightly and muttered just loud enough for him to hear. It was a tough world out there without a safety net, and I didn't look back. I did not need to. Vanessa fell even more spectacularly. Without Daniel's or my financial support, her idyllic world disintegrated quickly. Before she knew it, her house had been repossessed. Her credit cards were maxed out, and her bank accounts had been closed. I had planned everything so exactly that the time felt cinematic. I was leaving work late one evening when I noticed her standing by my car, trembling. Her fashionable coat couldn't cover her weight loss or the hollowness in her eyes. Jonathan, she croaked, coming forward. I raised an eyebrow. Calm as always. Vanessa. What do I attribute the joy to? Her lips twitched. Please, we are homeless. Emma and I have nowhere to go. I let that settle in for a moment, relishing the irony. Oh, I replied, pretending astonishment. Didn't your sweetheart have a backup plan? She winced, tears pouring. He went, grabbed what little we had, and vanished. I was mistaken. Jonathan, the first made an error. An error. I repeated, savoring the word like good wine. Please, we did not mean it. We were just. She stuttered over the words, desperation seeping through every syllable. I moved closer, my sight meeting hers. Having fun? I finished for her, a slow, frigid smile forming on my face. Yes, so am I. She slumped and began sobbing into her hands. Her pride was damaged beyond repair. Emma was not far behind, standing across the street. Too humiliated or angry to approach. She looked nothing like the arrogant, entitled girl who once referred to me as a temporary ATM. Now she was just another victim of her own avarice. As I moved away, their cries faded into the background hum. It was over. No, I'd won. They expected me to change my mind. They believed. I hoped that somewhere beneath the ruins of the guy they had betrayed, guilt would fester, but not me. That pity would sneak in like an unwanted visitor. But they were mistaken. I didn't feel anything. No sympathy. No regret. Just the peaceful satisfaction that comes from knowing justice has been done. Not by an outside force, but by my own hands. I saw them occasionally, shadows of their former selves slipping through the cracks of my new life. Vanessa's once perfect face now showed signs of stress and sorrow. Her fashionable attire had been replaced with second-hand clothing that didn't quite fit. Emma, dubbed Arrogant Emma, has lost the smug confidence that had oozed from her every utterance. She was simply another face in a crowd. Invisible and unimportant. I observed them from a distance. Never approach. Just observing them scavenge. For pieces of the life they had recklessly burned to the ground. They moved like ghosts. Haunted not by me, but by the echoes of their own decisions. And as they crumbled, I rebuilt. Her name was Claire. We met at a local charity event. One of those relaxed meetings with high-priced wine and polite small conversation. She wasn't the room's loudest or flashiest. She did not use her confidence as armor or her attractiveness as a weapon. Claire was unusual. She exuded a gentle firmness and kindness that grabbed attention without demanding it. Our initial talk was about literature. There is nothing dramatic. Just two folks discussing stories we enjoyed. Lost in the ease of simplicity. So, what is your story? She inquired, her gaze inquiring but not prying. I chuckled gently and swirled the wine in my glass. Oh, this is a long one. Let's just say it has all the nice stuff. Betrayal, revenge, and a few story twists. She laughed without realizing how literal I was being. This sounds like something worth reading. I did not tell her everything that night. Some stories require time to unfold. Claire was an easy date. There were no games or secret objectives underneath her words. She preferred honesty above dishonesty. She said she cared, and I believed her. She smiled. There wasn't a mask with her. I didn't have to fake. One evening, we sat on my balcony, the city lights extending out like scattered embers underneath us. She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt more than just content. I felt peaceful. You're different, she whispered, tracing lazy patterns on my arm. How are they different? I inquired, my voice low. The night surrounded us like a blanket. Like someone who has gone through a fire but has not allowed it to consume them. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I glanced out over the city, reflecting on the man I used to be. The man they attempted to break. Perhaps, I eventually said. Or perhaps I simply learned how to create something greater from the ashes. She lovingly squeezes my hand. No questions or expectations. Just a peaceful agreement. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Emma fell further into obscurity. I learned from mutual connections that they had been evicted from yet another residence, struggling to find a job despite their ruined reputations. Daniel. Last I checked, he had fled town, drowning in debt and shame. But I didn't care enough to keep track. Their lives had become mere footnotes in my story. I didn't waste my second chance. It was one of those nights when the rain didn't just come. It poured as if the sky was attempting to wash away the world's sins. The kind of rain that washed away our thoughts. Streets are transformed into rivers, and souls into delicate floating creatures. I was sitting at my apartment's window, holding a drink of bourbon and watching the droplets racing down the glass. Claire had left a few hours before, leaving her warmth in the room's quiet corners. There was tranquility in the solitude, as the subtle buzz of life outside blended with the regular beat of the rain. Then came a knock. It was neither timid nor hesitant. It was frenetic, desperate, the type of knock that involved more than just fists hitting wood. It contained remorse, anxiety, and the weight of mistakes that could not be reversed. I opened the door, and there she was. Vanessa was wet from head to foot. Her hair was stuck to her face. The harsh rain took away all of my makeup. Her previously proud posture had vanished, replaced by a slumped, weak figure grasping at the doorframe as if it were the only thing holding her up. Her eyes, once full of arrogance and entitlement, were now hollow, deep wells of remorse and tiredness. "Jonathan," she muttered, her voice thin and nearly buried by the storm behind her. I did not say anything. I just remained there, allowing the silence to spread between us like an invisible barrier she'd never be able to overcome. "Please. I have lost everything. We have lost everything." She gasped out her breath, quivering with each word. "I am sorry. I did not intend for it to go this far. I was stupid. I was blind." She took a hesitant step forward, Raindrops from her garments accumulated at her feet. Her fingers reached out, shaking, as if touching me would link her back to the life she'd abandoned. I looked at her without wrath, which had long since burned out. I sensed a colder, sharper apathy. "I forgive you." I spoke gently, my voice cutting through the rain like a razor. She froze, her gaze searching mine for hope. The moment I realized I deserved more, a flash of perplexity crossed her face, immediately followed by despair. "But forgiveness," I continued, knowing that keeping my stare steady did not guarantee a second chance. It was like witnessing a building collapse in slow motion. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Loud, nasty howls bounced off the walls and combined with the thunder outside. I did not reach for her. I did not provide comfort. I just stepped over her. Outside in the rain, I let the door swing shut behind me with silent finality. The storm buried her cries, and I continued walking. The days following Vanessa's impassioned plea were different. I felt lighter, as if the weight that had suffocated me for so long had finally been lifted. There was a new rhythm in my life, one that seemed natural and consistent, a far cry from the chaos and dishonesty that once characterized my every move. The mornings had always been a blur, rushed, wired, and exhausted from the effort of appearing to be someone I wasn't. But mornings had become sacrosanct. I took solace in their calm simplicity. There are no more blasting alarm clocks. No more breakfast grins. Instead, I awoke to warm golden light seeping through the curtains, the world outside still sleeping, providing me with a rare moment of peace. Claire was often present, already up, sipping her coffee in the kitchen. Her movements had a relaxing quality to them, graceful and unhurried. She never pushed me to discuss the past, never delved into the areas of me that I wasn't ready to discuss. But she was present, steady, a calming presence in the storm I had left behind. We didn't need huge gestures or lengthy discussions to feel connected. The subtle touch of her hand as we walked to the car, the way her laughter filled the spaces between us, the soft glances exchanged during dinner, all of these things communicated volumes, without saying anything. "You're quiet today," Claire commented one morning, disturbing the silence as I looked out the window, watching birds dart between tree branches. "Just thinking." I responded with my fingertips tracing the rim of my coffee cup. "I never imagined I'd find peace in mornings like these." "I believe you deserve it," she added with a smile that softened the rough edges of my spirit. And for the first time in years, I believed it. Regardless of the damage we leave behind, the world continues to move forward. For me, that meant returning to normalcy, a new normal free of the ghosts of betrayal and deception. I concentrated on work, re-establishing the connections I'd lost during my marriage, and making new ones that felt honest and genuine. I took on new initiatives, pushed the boundaries, and experienced the pleasure of success once more. I wasn't proving anything to anyone, but rather to myself. I could feel the alteration in my bones. I was not the man they broke. I was the man that I rebuilt. Every day was a fresh brick in the foundation. I was making myself stronger, wiser, and free of the burdens of my past. I did not glance back, not because I didn't care, but because I had no reason to. My future was in the present. In the moments I shared with Claire, there were no more incomplete talks or unanswered questions. I'd left my past where it belonged, in the ashes. I had risen, stronger than ever. One evening after supper, we sat on the balcony. The metropolis stretched out under us like a living, breathing entity. The stars stood out against the dark sky, and the air was crisp with the promise of change. Claire sat back in her chair, a faint smile forming on the edges of her lips. "Do you ever think of them?" she inquired, her tone low and serious. "Sometimes," I spoke, briefly turning to face her. "And then I recall that I am no longer that man." She nodded, indicating comprehension. "You are not the weight of everything." The betrayal, hatred, and desire for vengeance seemed like distant memories now. A shadow that could not reach me. I learned how to let go. I'd learned to live. We sat silently for a while, allowing the calm to wrap around us like a blanket. At that moment, I recognized that peace could not be coerced or planned. It was something you discovered when you stopped looking for it, and allowed life to develop naturally. I was different, yet it did not leave a scar. It was an indicator of survival, progress, and resilience. I was no longer the man I once was, overwhelmed by fury and resentment. In his stead stood someone who understood the importance of love, honesty, and trust. Not because I had always known it, but because its absence had left me damaged and rebuilt. And that in itself was a gift. "Are you happy?" Claire inquired, her voice bringing me back to the present. I genuinely grinned for the first time in years. "I am more than I imagined I could be." Her gaze softened, and she reached for my hand, squeezing it lightly. "Good. Because you deserved it." And for the first time, I believed her. Years passed. The rain has come and gone. The seasons had changed. And where there had previously been bitterness and pain, there was now something solid, something unshakable. Life had gone on as it normally does. However, it did not always eliminate the recollections. I stood in the corner of the cafe, observing them. Vanessa and Daniel. They did not see me, not yet. Their gaze was fixated on the table, hands clenched together. Their discourse became too engrossed in the miniature universe they created between themselves. They were shadows of the people. They had previously been washed out by time and the repercussions of their own conduct. There was no more fire in their eyes or arrogance in their demeanor. They were broken not just physically, but also deeply, as regret chipped away at their spirits. Vanessa had always been gorgeous, but now the beauty had gone, worn down by stress and terrible decisions. Her formerly flawless makeup was smudged. Her clothing is cheap and uninspiring. Daniel, who previously strutted about life with the arrogance of a guy who believed he had it all, now appeared to have lost everything. And he had. His once lively charisma had faded into the dullness of someone who had been humiliated by the world. His shoulders dropped in defeat. I felt no surge of triumph or desire to gloat. If anything, it felt underwhelming. There they were, reduced to mere afterthoughts in my existence. They had previously been everything to me. But now, they were now irrelevant. I sipped my coffee gently, allowing the warmth to seep through me, a peaceful consolation in the middle of this unusual reunion. The air in the cafe felt denser, thicker with their desperation. Even if they weren't saying anything. Vanessa's voice trembled slightly as she talked, attempting and failing to maintain a pretense of normalcy. I'm not sure how I arrived at this point. Oh, I thought we'd be happy. I believed we'd finally have the life we wanted. Her words had become empty echoes, lost in the cafe's bustle. She sounded little and vulnerable, as if her hopes had been crushed by the weight of reality. Daniel sighed and rubbed his temples, his gaze never leaving his coffee. Yeah, dreams don't always turn out as planned. Sometimes we make big mistakes. His voice sounded rough, like sandpaper. It was not the confident tone I had previously recognized. It was defeated. I didn't anticipate things to go this way. I never imagined it would be this difficult. I regarded them objectively, a silent observer of their anguish. They were both suffering. Yes, but the suffering was not my fault. It was because they had wasted everything. They had squandered their opportunity for happiness and personal growth. And now they have nothing to show for it. They didn't notice me, and it didn't matter. I was a ghost to them. A face they didn't recognize. They had no idea what I had accomplished, or who I had become. They only understood the implications of their own conduct. The life they'd built is suddenly disintegrating beneath the weight of their decisions. My phone buzzed in my pocket, displaying a familiar message from Claire with her name on the screen. You okay? The text reads. I grinned and typed a fast reply. I am fine. Just taking a moment. To be honest, I was perfectly all right. I felt at ease for the first time in years. I had no need for vengeance and no desire for payback. I'd already won. I hadn't destroyed them. I had rebuilt myself. I'd walked away from the debris of my past and discovered something genuine. Something honest. I'd discovered Claire. Someone who understood me, who accepted me without expectations. And in doing so, I discovered a side of myself that I had never known existed. Someone who did not need to hold on to the anguish of the past. Someone who could finally let go. I observed as they continued to speak, their communication faltering, punctuated by silences that were too weighty to dismiss. They didn't realize it, but they'd already lost. They had lost because their lives would be eternally defined by the decisions they made, and the betrayal they committed. They had lost because they attempted to destroy me, but I had emerged from the ashes stronger, better, and freer than ever. That was the greatest vengeance of all. It wasn't about getting them on their knees. It wasn't about watching them suffer as they had made me suffer. It was not about getting even. It was about never allowing them to destroy me. I had survived, which was more than enough. I was not the same man I had been when I first discovered the truth. The bitterness, the fury, the need for retribution. Those emotions had subsided, replaced by the joy of knowing I had created something greater. I stood up and left the cafe without looking back. The door gleamed softly behind me as I stepped into the universe that was mine to create. And for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, free of the weight of the past. Vanessa and Daniel were no longer part of my story. They were just another chapter, long completed and forgotten. I was now the creator of my own life, and I was crafting a story about rebirth rather than revenge.